The front door of Marcus Whitfield's mansion stood wide open at 2 in the afternoon, and Reuben Carter felt his stomach twist the moment he saw it swinging gently in the breeze, because doors like that, in neighborhoods like this, were never left open by accident. Reuben had walked 20 minutes from the bus stop in his only good shirt, a resume folded carefully in a manila envelope, ready to hand-deliver it to the CEO of Whitfield Logistics himself, hoping that a face and a handshake might succeed where 40 online applications had failed. He was 3 months behind on rent, his 6-year-old daughter Nora was waiting for him at his sister's apartment with a backpack half-packed in case they had to move again, and he had promised himself, that today would be the day something finally turned around. He never imagined that keeping that promise would mean walking into danger instead of an interview. Before we go further, if you believe that ordinary people can still do extraordinary things, and that kindness has a way of finding its way back to us, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House so you never miss a story like this one. Reuben stood frozen on the marble steps, staring at the open door, telling himself to turn around and call the police from a safe distance. But then he heard it, a small, muffled cry from somewhere deep inside the house, high and frightened, the unmistakable sound of a child. His feet moved before his mind caught up. He had spent the last 2 years raising Nora alone since her mother left, and something in him simply could not walk away from a child's cry, not when he knew exactly what fear sounded like from the other side of a locked door. He stepped inside cautiously, his sneakers silent on the polished floor, and followed the sound past a grand staircase and through a hallway lined with photographs of a life he could barely imagine, vacations in places he'd only seen in magazines, a woman who must have been Whitfield's late wife, and a boy, maybe 8 years old, grinning gap-toothed in nearly every frame. In the kitchen, Reuben found 2 men in dark clothing rifling through drawers, pulling out jewelry boxes and a small safe they had already pried from the wall, and standing terrified in the corner, pressed against the refrigerator with tears streaming down his face, was that same boy from the photographs. Reuben's heart slammed against his ribs. He was not a fighter. He was a warehouse worker who had lost his job 8 months ago when the company downsized, a man who spent his nights doing gig deliveries just to keep the lights on, not someone built for confrontation. But he thought of Nora, of what he would want a stranger to do if she were the one cowering in a corner, and that thought silenced every instinct telling him to run. He grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from a side table and shouted, loud and sudden, startling the 2 men enough that one dropped the jewelry box, its contents scattering across the tile like a handful of stars. What happened next was chaos folded into 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. One of the burglars lunged at Reuben, and he swung the vase, more out of desperate instinct than any plan, catching the man's shoulder hard enough to make him stumble into a stack of pans that crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter. The second man grabbed the boy's arm, perhaps thinking to use him as a shield or a hostage, and it was that single act that transformed Reuben's fear into something fiercer than fear, a father's fury. He threw himself forward, pulling the boy free with a strength he didn't know he had, shoving the child behind him even as the burglar's fist caught him across the jaw, snapping his head sideways and filling his vision with white sparks. The noise of the struggle had already carried through the house, and moments later Marcus Whitfield himself came bursting through the back entrance, having just returned from a meeting he'd cut short after his housekeeper failed to answer 3 phone calls. What Marcus saw when he rounded the corner into his kitchen stopped him cold. His son shielded behind the body of a stranger in a wrinkled dress shirt, that stranger bleeding from the mouth but still standing between his boy and 2 armed intruders, refusing to move even as he swayed on his feet. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy iron poker resting by the kitchen fireplace insert and charged in, and between the 2 of them, one exhausted deliverman and one CEO who hadn't thrown a punch since college, they managed to drive the burglars back long enough for the alarm company's dispatched security team, alerted automatically when the safe had been breached, to arrive with police only 90 seconds behind them. The burglars were caught fleeing through the side gate, and within minutes the quiet, manicured street was filled with flashing lights, and Marcus Whitfield sat on his own kitchen floor holding his son so tightly the boy could barely breathe, tears cutting clean lines through the older man's composed face for the first time in longer than he could remember. It was only after the ambulance had checked the boy over, only after the police had taken statements, that Marcus finally turned to look properly at the man who had saved his son's life, and it was only then that he noticed the crumpled manila envelope still clutched in Ruben's hand, edges soft from being held too tightly for too long. Marcus asked him what it was, and Ruben, embarrassed, admitted he had come to drop off his resume, that he'd read online that Whitfield Logistics was hiring warehouse supervisors, and that he'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that showing up in person might set him apart from the pile of applications sitting in some inbox. He explained, quietly and without asking for pity, that he was raising his daughter alone, that he'd do anything for steady work, and that he genuinely had not planned on his job application turning into anything like this. Marcus, still holding his son against his chest, looked at this stranger with new eyes, not the eyes of an executive scanning a resume for keywords, but the eyes of a father who understood, with sudden and total clarity, that the measure of a man has nothing to do with what's printed on paper. He didn't offer Ruben a warehouse position. He offered him a seat at his table that evening, insisting he stay until his split lip was properly looked at, insisting that Nora be picked up and brought over too, because no child should spend her evening wondering why her father hadn't come home. Nora arrived wide-eyed at the size of the house, but she lit up entirely when she saw the boy, Theo, sitting on the living room floor with a set of building blocks, and within 20 minutes the two children were laughing together as though they'd known each other for years, a small and simple joy blooming in a house that had been touched by fear only hours before. Over dinner, Marcus asked Ruben more questions than any interview ever would have, about his work history, about the years he'd spent managing shipment logistics before his old company folded, about how he'd been getting by, about Nora and what kind of father he hoped to be for her. And somewhere between the second course and dessert, Marcus realized that this man sitting across from him, still wincing every time he smiled because of his swollen jaw, possessed exactly the qualities no resume could ever capture: courage without hesitation, selflessness without calculation, and a quiet steadiness that Marcus recognized because it was the same quality he hoped, more than anything, that his own son would grow up to have. By the end of the week, Ruben wasn't just hired as a warehouse supervisor. Marcus created a position for him overseeing operations and safety training across 3 facilities, a role with real responsibility and a salary that meant Ruben could finally stop counting days until rent was due. But more than the job, what changed was something harder to put into words: a friendship forged in a single terrifying afternoon, a bond between 2 fathers who understood exactly what the other had almost lost. Theo and Nora became inseparable, their weekend visits turning into a rhythm neither family wanted to break, 2 children who had found something rare in each other that neither fully understood yet but both instinctively cherished. Months later, when people asked Marcus Whitfield how he found his head of operations, he would tell them the truth, that the best hire of his life walked into his house not through the front door with a polished pitch, but through chaos, through fear, through an instinct to protect a stranger's child that revealed more character in 30 seconds than any interview could reveal in 30 hours. And Ruben, when Nora asked him one evening why Mr. Whitfield had given him such a big chance, simply told her that sometimes the world gives you a terrible moment just to show someone else who you really are. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness still matters in this world. And before we go, if you're watching this today, drop the word "blessed" in the comments if you believe good people deserve good things to happen to them too. Ruben Carter never got the interview he came for that afternoon. He got something far greater instead, a second chance built not on a piece of paper, but on the truest kind of proof there is.